Congressman Forbes, you are the founder of the Prayer Caucus, and you're launching something called Faith It Forward. Could you tell us what Faith It Forward is all about?
The Congressional Prayer Caucus now has almost 100 members of Congress. It's a bipartisan group that we now even are joined with the Senate, but we normally stand and fight for religious freedom and religious liberties. But one of the things that we've been looking at across the country, and I'm sure you're aware of and most of your viewers, is that people of faith, and especially Christians, are probably under more attack today for their faith than at any time, certainly in my lifetime. And part of the reason is because the narrative about people of faith is really being told by the anti-faith people, and sometimes the mainstream media, much of which supports the anti-faith effort. And so what we realized is we had to change that narrative, because if you listen to the narrative that's played, it's people of faith are normally not as smart as everybody else, they're normally not the best athletes, the best leaders, and nothing could be further from the truth. So what this initiative is people can go to facebook.com/Faith It Forward, and we are collecting thousands and thousands of stories. Organizations are coming together, members of Congress are coming together to tell the stories, not how people came to their faith, but what their faith has done to transform their lives and the world around them. So when they say that people of faith are not as smart as everybody else, I graduated valedictorian from my college. When they say there's not as good of an athlete, you look at somebody like Sean Alexander, a good friend of mine, who he'll say faith is a major component of his life. He wasn't just an athlete, he was the most valuable player in the NFL. If you look at so many of our generals and our leaders, faith was a big part of their lives. We have people that are feeding the hungry, that are helping with adoptions, that are caring for people. People, instead of being suicidal and depressed, they've got joy in their lives. That's the narrative we've got to start telling, and that's what Faith It Forward is designed to do.
In Charleston, a young man motivated by hate went into a church and killed 9 people. And now the faith community is talking about love, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Is that the kind of impact you're talking about?
Absolutely, and I think it will, because if you look at the faith community, that's what they do. You know, this happened to be a potential racial component that you could argue it, but you remember we had the young Amish children just a few years ago, the same thing happened. That wasn't a racial situation there, but you know, it was still that hatred and the violence in the world that we live in. The interesting thing to me is that most faith stories, if you really tell the stories of what happened, it's the strength that the people have when they go through these tragedies to then turn around and not burn or riot or tear somebody's buildings apart, but to come together and actually talk about forgiveness, something that is really, really a strong component of faith.
You also say this initiative is important to help protect religious freedom. Is religious freedom something that's at risk of being taken away right now?
I think terribly at risk as we look across the country, more so than at any point in time in my life. And one of the things that's important that the country realize is what happens if we take this faith component out of our country. It's been a central thread that's woven through the tapestry of freedom we've had since the birth of this country. And people sometimes, even people of faith, don't realize just what a strong thread that is. We want to make sure as we're telling these narratives that the public starts looking and saying, do we really want to lose this out of our society? And I think the answer is clearly we don't. Our faith helped get us here, but even more importantly, it's about tomorrow, because the faith is going to be the guiding force, I think, to get us through some very challenging times ahead.
The initiative launches on June 23rd. Tell us what's going to be happening.
We have a large number of members of Congress, organizations that will start not only putting these stories up, but tweeting them out, getting them out through all kinds of social media, telling the stories back at home and other places. But the great thing about this initiative is anybody at home can go right on and put their story of faith or somebody that they know, because this will be a central clearinghouse that people across the country can go on and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea this person's faith was such an important part of their lives, and look at what they're doing. We have local people here that, you know, had nothing when they were coming up. One man in Suffolk, a good dear friend of mine, but he had very little when he was growing up, but because of his mother's faith, every night at the dinner table, they would have people from the community sitting at their table. When he started his business, he had a push lawnmower, he had 1 gas tank, and he had a plastic jug, milk jug, that he kept his oil in. Today, he's got a very successful business, but he gives out turkeys at Thanksgiving, and he is probably helped 64,000 people over the years because of his faith. In fact, if you go there at Thanksgiving, the line will be 2 and 3 hours long of people that he's giving to. They're the stories we need to be telling, and we haven't been successful in doing that for a long time. We hope to change that around.
You are inviting citizens to join this initiative. How can they participate?
Number one, they can share their stories and put them on here, because every time you share that story, there's going to be a lot of people that read it that you didn't realize. But it's not just their story. It's other stories of people in their church, their communities, who are really changing the world around them. This country needs to know, and the world needs to know, what people of faith are doing to add to their country and to their communities. But the second thing is, they need to be telling these stories. So they need to go back home, and instead of just always wringing their hands and saying, oh, the future looks so bad, and we don't want to watch the news anymore, this is good news stories. And they need to be telling these stories and saying, there's some good people in this country, they're doing some good things, and a lot of that is because of the faith that they have that gets them through.